Hello and welcome back to the Making Things Work podcast, where we discuss all things digital transformation and leadership in the workplace. I'm your host, Duncan Prior, and I help organizations simplify and transform through the use of technology. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Gus Schellekens, who is the founder of Sustainability Leadership Forum. And the title of today's show is Sustainable Work. Hi there, Gus.
Hi, Duncan.
How are you today?
Very good. Thank you for inviting me to join you.
No problem at all. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today. And it was brilliant to record the podcast a couple of months ago with your colleague, Deborah Webster, as well. That might come up during the chat today. But what we like to do on the podcast, and what I very much want to do today, is to sort of jump in with the topic. Before this, we started talking about work and sustainability. But from our previous chats where we've been preparing for this, I really want to start by sort of diving in by just recapping the climate change crisis right from the start. And then we'll sort of get into the topics and your experience, Gus, after that. A lot of technical language and jargon out there. And I feel that sometimes that tends to end up downplaying the whole situation. And you can have a feeling that things are happening without you or me or anyone else actually sort of doing anything. So let's go straight in and clarify that, Gus. And could you just recap for us where we are with the current climate change crisis in the world?
Sure, happy to. Let's start with the story. In 1988, there was a top NASA scientist called James Hansen, who very famously and accurately warned Congress in the US that global warming would soon become evident. And most of the members of Congress listened very politely, but then did nothing about it. And if we roll forward 35 years, a few weeks ago, a new paper from scientists from over a dozen institutions, including James Hansen, was published. And it warned that the world's average temperature would surpass 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times within the next couple of years. Now, this was quite a bombshell to people like myself who work in the industry, because this is much faster than most existing forecasts had predicted. And the study also went on to say that due to global warming that is already locked in without extreme action by the international community, governments, businesses, societies, temperatures will reach 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels before 2050, again, much faster than most predictions. Now, you and I, Duncan, have already seen some of the early impacts of this in recent years. We've seen more frequent and more significant storms, rainfall, and flooding, and more extensive and sustained fires around the world. Droughts, extreme heat, cold conditions, changes in ocean temperatures, all of these have made headlines over the last few weeks and months. Now, as temperatures approach 2 to 3 degrees of warming, this is going to get worse. And we're going to see even more significant impacts in the coming years. Remaining species being wiped out, more than 1.5 billion people being displaced from their home regions and starting a migration to other parts of the world. Yields of stable crops like rice and wheat that we rely on will face a major decline. And this will trigger sustained food supply disruptions globally as well. Much of the tropics will be rendered uninhabitable for humans due to temperature increases. And given that currently over 50% of global GDP is dependent upon nature, when this happens, existing business models will be severely challenged and in many cases will fail. Why is it happening? Just a quick recap on that. Some of you may be aware that there's 9 planetary boundaries or processes that are vital to the healthy functioning of the planet. And these are based on what we take from the system in the areas of biodiversity, fresh water, and land use. And the remaining 6 areas come from the waste that we deposit back in the environment. Things like greenhouse gases, novel waste that we've created, like concrete, for example, nutrient overloads from fertilizers. And the key message here is that if we keep our activities to a safe level, the planet's own processes can handle it. But in 6 of the 9 vital life support systems, we've now blown well past the safe zone. So we're in the danger zone, where we, as well as every other species, are now at risk.
I really like this idea of the 9 planet boundaries. It enables you to sort of encapsulate the situation to do with the way the planet works, quite simply, because it gets otherwise the whole subject gets quite complicated quite quickly. So thanks for doing that. I think it's so important just to spell out in really black and white terms exactly where we are, because as I said, it gets a little bit lost in all the detail. And one of the challenges for us as humans and people at work is that we really always encourage to come into work to be positive, to solve problems, and so on and so forth. Really, the fact of the matter is that most companies are really only making any money, which we'll come on to as well in a second, by consuming the world's natural resources. And you can tend to think that the only companies doing that are the ones that just extract sort of raw materials from the ground. But really, every company in the world is kind of cheating. And as Deborah mentioned when we were chatting, that there's this concept that if it's not on your balance sheet, it's on somebody else's.
Yeah.
And it makes it very, very difficult for someone in the workplace to think, well, what can I do?
No, that's right, Duncan. And I mentioned earlier that most of the GDP in the world is dependent on nature. What may not be clear to everyone is that capitalism really is the root cause of the ecological crisis that we're facing today, and also a key barrier to solving it. And there's two reasons for it. Firstly, capitalism can't exist without economic growth. Growth is the mantra that we've all been chasing for years and told growth is good. And economic growth is also the reason why our emissions have been increasing over the last 30 years, and further growth will make it impossible to decarbonize in time. The reason that's important is unless we do decarbonize, we run the risk of activating what's known as tipping points in the ecological system. And a tipping point, a very simple example, is if the ice on Greenland melts, you can't suddenly refreeze it and end up with an ice sheet on Greenland again. So these are sort of one-way consequences that once they happen, they're very, very difficult to undo. Another example would be if Siberia defrosts, for example, the amount of methane that gets lost, there's no way to capture that and refreeze that in the permafrost. And the second reason why capitalism creates a problem is that our minds have been shaped by capitalism, and it's stopping us from perhaps seeing both the role capitalism plays in the cause of climate change, but also the full scope of solutions available to address the crisis. We're reaching in our tool bag and using the same tools over and over again to solve a very, very different problem that we've never faced before.
Yeah, I often think the picture in my mind is of the Victorians who, in the Industrial Revolution, where there was sort of people running businesses walking around in top hats, and everyone was absolutely nose to the grindstone, working 7 days a week. And we can kind of fool ourselves a little bit, it seems to me, but actually the spewing smoke coming and pollution coming out of chimneys, that's not happening where you live, but it's happening somewhere else. And actually we're still all nose to the grindstone. And okay, so maybe we work 5 days a week now, not 7, but actually quite a lot of people work 6. So it strikes me as maybe being quite similar to where it was back then. It's just maybe a bit better.
Not much has changed, and I've got a few other good stories for you, Duncan, later on, which touch on that as well. We think we've changed, but we've not.
Right. Yes. Okay. Well, thanks for that sort of introduction. I think that sets the scene very well. So, can we go now back to yourself and the Sustainability Leadership Forum, and can you just introduce yourself and the work of the forum?
Yes, I'd love to. My background is as someone who studied science at university. I focused on oceanography and biology, and then I moved into management consultancy. And for 15 years or so, I worked with and within some of the largest companies in the world on a range of strategy, business, IT projects, and programs of work. And in most of these, I had responsibility for pulling together the overall plan and then supporting and managing people in enabling outcomes to be achieved. So it taught me a lot about how businesses work, what drives them, and the roles that people play inside them. The second part of my career then began around 2007 when I had the opportunity to move into the sustainability and climate change team whilst at PwC. And here I managed to bring together my interest in the science and the concerns around the natural world with my business consulting experience. And this was also the time, you might remember, we had the Energiewende in Germany, which kicked off a huge feed-in tariff program and a boom in the solar PV industry. And active discussions began across the EU and the rest of the world about using renewables. The most recent, and I guess the most important and exciting part of my career began a few weeks ago when I set up the Sustainability Leadership Forum. This was founded by myself with the help of two very good friends, James Duthie and Deborah Webster, to fill what we saw was a gap in the market. Most of us will hopefully be aware, as we mentioned earlier, perhaps from their personal engagement, that significant action is needed at all levels to prepare ourselves for the changes that are coming our way as a result of climate change. But many individuals don't have the knowledge, skills, or insights to be able to manage or deliver change in their organizations or personal lives. And for example, recent studies have shown that most CEOs have no knowledge of ESG or sustainability matters, and this is worrying. So we set up the Sustainability Leadership Forum to guide organizations, helping them to envision what a sustainable future could look like for themselves, steering them towards longer-term strategies rooted in good environmental, social, and governance principles. And what we like to do is we help organizations course correct their planetary impact. And we do this with board members, the CEO, the CFO, particularly the CSO and their team. And we provide them with the necessary tools and coaching and support. And it also reflects the fact that whilst climate and sustainability professionals should be at the very epicenter of innovation and strategic learning within organizations at this time, they rarely are. And that's because in most settings, climate and sustainability professionals are not getting paid to change important things. They're getting paid to protect important things from change.
Yes, and often those roles, you can only, the only scope that you really have is to bring in experts such as yourself to help. It's if you're the permanent member of staff within a corporation, all you can do is bring in other people. So I think it's going to work out extremely well. You touched on something there, which is probably just to cover off another little bit of the terminology, is because I've made the mistake in the past, maybe others, of thinking that the S in ESG stands for sustainability when actually it stands for social. So we get into this sort of terminology about ESG and sustainability and various other terms. Could you just sort of break those down a little bit? Because I think it's worth recapping for everyone. Because like myself, I've sometimes get a bit. Yeah. It all sort of sounds like it's all the same thing.
Well, I think we're very good at coming up with labels for lots of things, and it's certainly happened in the sustainability space, and my experience of working with companies in many countries and of different sizes is that sustainability definitely means different things to different people. For some, it only relates to revenues, financial sustainability of a business, because this is all that's being measured, and what gets measured gets done. For others, sustainability sometimes is a word that's used to describe the continuity of the business. How do we ensure, succession, enduring sort of legacy of a business, targets being met, etc. So I guess the two key terms that are bandied around are ESG and sustainability. And they're two distinct concepts, and they shouldn't be used synonymously. If we start with ESG, environment, social governance, this has its origins in the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, UNPRI. It's a publication from around the mid-2000s that used ESG as a basis for a risk management and due diligence process. So I'll repeat that, risk management and due diligence. It was used to assess the risks faced by an organization that could materially impact its value from an environment, social, or governance point of view. Sustainability, on the other hand, first emerged in the 1980s and addresses the impacts of an organization on the external environment, on the economic and social dimensions. So sustainability is often summarized as the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. i.e. on the positive long-term value that a business can create across a number of dimensions. What's counterintuitive is that an organization could meet its ESG risk criteria while still being unsustainable, whilst the reversed, of course, is unlikely. Another approach, just a final term to throw into the discussion, is regenerative business models. And these aim to have companies not only avoid negative impacts, but also to actively improve the well-being of the environment and society within which they operate. Now, this requires a rethinking of business strategy, design of products, and we're seeing some very, very interesting examples around this beginning to appear. And just to finish off on other labels, because we like to simplify things, there's also other labels that have been used in business. Corporate social responsibility is something that's been around for years. B Corp, net zero, science-based targets. These all take a specific frame of reference in relation to the performance of a company that's then used to justify its way of operating, attract investment, and satisfy regulatory and compliance requirements. Only a few actually take into account the pricing of externalities and the impact and dependencies that companies have on the natural world. We also talked previously, Duncan, about the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN came out with in 2015. And most people are aware of those and realize that there's 17 areas that collectively require attention. What's important is that all 17 SDGs and the 169 targets that underpin them need to be addressed globally. Climate change is a global issue, a global risk multiplier. So it requires a change in mindset at a societal level. Getting the labels right, using the right terminology, I think will become even more important in years to come.
Yeah, so the E in ESG then is more about, to put it in maybe one term, like not being sued because you're polluting a river, as it were, rather than fundamentally looking at the sustainability of the business in the long term.
Yep.
And so this term regenerative has come up because it's also being used with this concept of generative AI. And there's a good, I suppose, maybe thinking positively, there's a term, the regenerative sustainability term does sound like something that people could get excited about. Perhaps you could talk a bit about where you think companies are on this sort of scale, because that would be the sort of sustainability summit, if you like, where you really are, you've fully sort of embraced the sustainability within your organization. Perhaps you can explain this to us a bit more about what that actually means as well, and sort of where companies are at the moment.
Yes, I mean, businesses are. I think if you look at the business community globally, they obviously fall into cohorts, and some of the cohorts are not surprising. There are always people who do nothing, and so there are always companies that do nothing, and they will not do nothing. They will not do anything until they're forced to do something. You've then got a second level of company that's realized that if they don't do anything, they will pay penalties, fees, etc. So they're the ones who focus on compliance typically. They will do what's needed to keep their nose clean and perhaps nothing else. You've then got a third category of companies that have realized that actually sustainability offers efficiency gains, savings, and it makes good business sense. So they've engaged in lots of practices and put systems in place that focus on how they can reduce, for example, water use, energy use, for example. A fourth category of company might then realize that, cost savings are good, but actually we could do more. We should start thinking about sustainability in terms of our strategy and our products and our design. So there's a more strategic use of sustainability to look for white space in the market, to outcompete some of their competitors, to come up with innovative products, to horizon scan and sort of to be ahead of where the rest of the market is. And then the final stage is this regenerative approach. And at the moment, it tends to be smaller companies because it's obviously easier to change things around in a smaller company than it is a bigger company. And these businesses are designing their whole strategy, their operations, their processes, their systems, the way they engage with people, societies, etc., with a view to constantly nourishing, replenishing, regenerating the natural environment and the social environment in which they operate. So everything they do has to have a positive outcome from an environmental and a social point of view. This is new. It challenges our existing sort of organizational model. The economic system, of course, investors don't understand it because you're not based on an extractive model of squeezing assets and trying to get high returns. So it doesn't make sense. But it does make sense if you look at the wider picture and begin to measure some of the other outcomes that you achieve as well, the non-financial outcomes in many cases, which we're not measuring today. And a very simple example from a few years ago that I used with a client was, you've got a business case for a project, you've done your return on investment, and you've got a return on investment of, 15, 20% or something. This is the classic way of approaching, of deciding whether a project should go ahead or not. And then I've got another calculation of exactly the same business case that takes into account other areas that you haven't measured in the first business case assessment, which show that actually there is a consequence of, you've used too much water or you've destroyed too much nature, and you're going to have an impact on your business in the longer term in terms of operating costs. And actually, option B, a completely separate one, which was discounted the first time round, is the sensible one to take forward when you balance both the non-financial and the financial return on investment. Most companies don't take that level of sophistication. They do a financial assessment and that's it. And based on that, they make a decision, completely ignore the cost of inputs, the cost of outputs for which they don't need to pay, and make a short-term profit. So that needs to change. And I think what we're seeing, which is great, particularly from a small and medium-sized business point of view, is a lot of business owners can see much more value in that and, a much more viable business in the long term, particularly given the planetary changes that we're seeing at the moment.
Yes, and I can see and sympathise as well, where someone like myself, for example, who's done lots of technology solution projects and so on over the years, and a lot of it is what you call compliance related, isn't it? Where we started off when I was working there, various financial regulations. More recently, you have GDPR, and so these laws and regulations come out, and then you have to comply with them, and then there's projects. And then we've all complied with them now, and now we're all happy. And that's very much the mindset, isn't it? We've got sort of the business compliance in sort of by the side, making sure we're not breaking any rules, and then the two things come together a little bit. But what we're talking about here is that governments, you can't really legislate for everything in a kind of Sarbanes-Oxley GDPR type of way here. Something completely different has to happen.
Yes, and I'm very familiar with the compliance environment, and we think we've achieved the goal. We've delivered the output that we're hoping for as a result of putting those things into place. But we haven't. All we've done, I guess, is put more process into place, created more work for individuals, but no one's actually measuring the outcomes or the outputs. Another great example, I talk about the health of the planet, but let's talk about our own personal health. And if you look at the NHS, full of wonderful people, they've done a fantastic job of supporting us over the last couple of years. But again, it's a classic example of where there is far too much complexity, process, checks, balances, etc., that it get in the way of just keeping people healthy. And we do the same ourselves. We're very happy to live our life the way we want to. Our body can cope with a lot of it. But in many cases, people will show up age 60 and then say to the NHS, save me. Whereas in fact, doing the right things and measuring the outcomes and outputs as you go through your life and making sure that your blood pressure remains within safe levels, your cholesterol is in safe levels, etc., you have a much better chance of remaining healthy and living a longer and fuller life. So we're sort of programmed in a way to, I guess, focus on process and think that that's tick the box and taking care of things. Certainly in relation to climate, that doesn't work.
You touched on a really interesting point here, which I don't think I haven't heard come up too much, and there's the let's talk about that a little bit more, because we're not talking about the individual as someone who is, as we talked about there, complies with their recycling and they get busy with that. It's about your own, the relationship between sustainability and solving the climate crisis, and our own personal development.
Yeah.
I just thought we touched on it briefly when we were preparing for this. I just thought it'd be really great to explore that a little bit more.
Yes, I mean, the world, well, the world that we've constructed is ultimately about individuals. Individual minds, decisions, etc. Companies are ultimately individuals as well. So if we focus on individuals a little bit, my view, and we can probably agree on this, is that individuals are complex, but they're also similar in many ways. We're all driven by our primary needs, whether it's shelter, food, warmth, security at a basic level. And we want to provide the above for our families, to belong in a tribe. In some cases, some people are driven to, go for leadership positions and so on. But we're also very simple creatures. We do what we're incentivized to do. And much of our society has developed over centuries to put in place the structures and systems that will deliver on these needs. So in a city, with sanitation, with running water, with electricity, with food available, we're ticking a lot of the boxes. And this offers security for some, but not all individuals. And there have been benefits from doing this, because we've seen that in terms of nutrition, lifespan, living standards, access to water, access to electricity in many countries. But some of our other traits undo some of these benefits. So laziness, a desire for quick solutions to problems, looking for the least cost option, unwillingness to consider wider impacts, have resulted in systems being put in place that, as mentioned above, are largely extractive, don't measure the true costs or the negative impacts, and are largely focused on continuous growth. And once these are in place, we're reluctant as a species to change these systems, to invest further amounts when the existing systems are seen as delivering on our needs. And this takes me back to a point on the SDGs that we also discussed earlier, Duncan, which is they came out in 2015. They arose as a result of the financial crisis in 2008, when people realized this shouldn't happen again. And we're now 8 years on, and the first sort of significant measurement point is in 2030. And we're far behind what we need to do on all of the SDGs, including SDG 8, which looks at work. And we as individuals have a key role to play in all of this by becoming better informed, being willing to engage openly on the issue, introducing small and lasting changes, not only in your own lifestyle, but as one of your previous speakers, Scott Stoneham, also mentioned, their ways of working, bringing it to the office, collectively engaging around issues, and putting pressure on governments and the companies that they buy from. So key takeaways, I guess, for individuals: become more informed about the scale of change that's happening, understand how the unpriced climate, ecological, and economic risks could impact you, where you live, how you live, what you do, where you work. Make sure you make the changes needed in your lifestyle to reduce unnecessary risks, and prepare yourself for new opportunities. We will see large-scale migration happening in the next 5, 10, 15 years as people begin to realize that they can't stay where they are. A very simple example, the border wall that President Trump was looking to build in the US came about as a result of agricultural collapse in Central America. If you have a family and your crops have failed several seasons, you will pack up and go somewhere else where you can be a farmer. So these things are all predictable. We can see them coming, but we can also intervene to make sure that people can stay where they want to stay and do what they want to do. But it requires individuals to take these 4 steps: becoming more informed, understanding, making sure that you make the changes, and then preparing yourself. The information's out there. They just need to engage with it.
Yeah, so as an individual, just picking up on the point about individuals, if you focus on your own learning, apart from just the some of the specific sort of issues to do with sustainability, you'll become very informed about the whole subject, and then various other issues which such as things like cognitive dissonance, which sort of they get in our way of us being open to new ideas and new thoughts, and really taking full responsibility and accountability for our own thoughts and actions. We'll understand those sorts of things a bit better as well. Then that will, there's a chance that can then make us more influential in wherever we're working or in our community. Those sorts of skills will come to the surface so that you can then bring your influence to bear. So it's a fascinating subject, maybe one for another day, where we can talk about the personal development skills that we can all undertake in order to apply ourselves to the problem.
Wow.
So we're not just thinking that other people are doing it for us.
I mean, I for some of our listeners who have children, this may sort of bring back some memories of when your children were younger, certainly around the 2, 3, and 4-year-old stage, and trying to convince an irate sort of toddler that they can't have what they want. I think some of those traits remain embedded in us as adults as well, and therefore, we don't like change. Most of us don't like change, and once we've set our mind on something, we want that, and we can't be dissuaded from it. And as you may know, using logic with a 2-year-old doesn't work. So we need to be creative and find lots of other ways of engaging with people and having them understand and realize what the issues are and what the alternatives are, and how some of the alternatives can actually be more exciting and deliver a better outcome.
Yeah, simple ones. That's just walking to school is a great example, isn't it? Where if everyone did that, that would be a big change right there.
Yep.
Pollution and congestion is caused by that. It's not caused by people actually driving to work, as you can see that in the holidays.
Yep.
These roads are empty.
Exactly.
Going on the applying that same sort of concept to companies and corporations, I had this idea in the past that there'll be a Darwinian sort of approach to this. There'll be companies that would fully embrace regenerative sustainability, as you were discussing there, and others who wouldn't. And the ones that would win would be the ones that did. And we would just get the outcome because maybe historically there have been lots of things that are much better today than they were yesterday, and that's because some companies have done a better job of whatever it is they're doing. But I'm not sure if that sort of that Darwinian approach to the way companies compete, you've already touched on it really, that's just not going to cut it anymore, is it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think there's certainly competition in the market, but there's also the point that some of the largest companies in the world are some of the biggest contributors to emissions. And if you took the top 100 companies and got them to clean up their act, we wouldn't have the problem we have today. So
right,
we can't wait for economics to weed out those badly performing companies, because by all measures of success that we use today, they're very successful companies and they make lots of money. So our measures of success and the areas that we're looking at are the wrong ones, really, to encourage the right behaviors in the market and also the emergence of the right businesses. A lot of the companies that will survive in the longer term will be the ones that set a clear climate ambition and vision. And they have an open and transparent business. And they set achievable emission reduction targets. They avoid greenwashing. They empower their employees. They influence governments in the right way, not in terms of lobbying to support their business against other competitors. And they also support their ecosystems. The problem is those are not very fashionable or not very exciting, and the financial return on investment might be lower than a company that's run ruthlessly, by people who are just focused on financial metrics, and therefore the system rewards the latter rather than the former. So I think we can't leave it to the market to sort this out. We need to intervene, whether it's at a government level, at a societal level, maybe through the investor lens. Money talks. It can have a powerful influence. And then finally, from a consumer level as well. These companies wouldn't exist if we didn't buy things from them.
Yes. Yeah. And you touched on greenwashing there, but I think it's become another term that it gets greenwashing, sports washing, and all these washing terms. The whole point is completely diluted, isn't it? By over time, it becomes sort of meaningless. But one of the talks you gave previously on YouTube is some corporations have talked about measures that they've taken, sustainability measures. But I think from our previous chats, you've said that some of this stuff really just falls into accounting to do with how you you don't dispose of things so quickly and stuff like that.
Yes, and a good example as well is a good way of testing whether an organization is really serious about sustainability as a whole is to look at what they've published and who's responsible for that. If it's the marketing department in a company, then obviously it hasn't touched the operational processes at all, and the business model hasn't changed. You've just got someone doing clever marketing and communications. The other way of telling if it's not really baked into business strategy is if they are very vocal about their 2050 or 2070 targets. I mean, in 25 or 40 years' time, it's very easy for me to promise all sorts of things because I won't be in post at that point in time. What's much more revealing is what I've said I will do in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years, by 2030 or something like that. That's granular. That's short term. I can't hide behind decades of inactivity. I have to show that I'm making progress to achieving those targets. And to get to ambitious targets by 2030, it means I need to do something every single year, cumulatively, so that it adds up to that significant target by 2030. So any company that's talking loudly about 2050, 2060 targets, they haven't really taken sustainability on board. They're not really changing their business model or the way they operate at all. There probably isn't a team and a department in place that's looking at it. Another very interesting proxy, Duncan, is look at the size of the finance department and look at the size of the sustainability department in a company. Okay, in big companies, you've got hundreds of people who work in finance, and they might have 1 or 2 people that work on sustainability. So what are they more serious about?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And then, so where do you think, for looking at, say, UK businesses, is there a way we can look at the UK and the companies within it as a where we are on the sort of maturity scale, just to give the listeners some sort of an indication? Is that something that's meaningful?
There's lots of measures which are out there. I think the danger with some of those is by being a single metric or measure, there's too much generalization and we lose out a lot of the richness. There was a study I saw the other day that the UK actually came in second place as the second most sustainable country in the world. Bit of a surprise to me, although there is legislation in place that the previous government put in place, which is great. Let's hope we don't row back from that too much. There's a real hotbed of small and medium-sized business in the UK that are definitely leading the charge. And we've seen this reaction in other countries as well, where if